I offer it to complement your efforts to provide equal opportunity for education for all of us here in this country. Thank you so much. And I yield back my time.
Thank you, Congressman Clark, and thank you for sharing your personal story. What's been sort of extraordinary to me is that over the last few months, as we've been working on H.R. 3826, is that our office has received communications from all over the country, folks talking about the importance of the Stafford program in terms of really transforming their lives. You know, I'll be at Chamber of Commerce meetings, I'll be at Rotary Club meetings, people who, you know, are not on my side of the aisle politically, but coming up to me afterwards and saying, you know, this is something that the Congress absolutely has to pay attention to and has to protect that lower rate. And thank God this person had the Stafford loan program available to him, just like you did. And to see that rate go up to 6.8% at a time when our economy, you know, Treasury bonds are being sold at 2% yield. You know, you can get a 30-year fixed mortgage for really under 4% right now. Variables much lower. I mean, when you tell people that this rate is going to double to 6.8% for this one segment of the population, young Americans who really are doing it for the purpose of you know, improving their own situation, it's greeted by just absolute utter disbelief. And at a time when, as you point out, debt levels, and I've got a little chart here from the Federal Reserve which shows where we're headed right now in this country. We have got to, number one, not make the condition worse by increasing the interest rate. And again, we've run the numbers over a 5-year period of time. Somebody who's got a Stafford loan portfolio is looking at an additional $5,000 in interest payments. It's $11,000 for over a 10-year period, which is, you know, quite normal, as you said, for people paying back their student loans. I mean, we are compounding the trend lines that the Federal Reserve Bank is, again, put up the warning flags to tell us that, you know, we're just creating crushing debt. The Wall Street Journal had a story, which I was thinking of it as you were speaking earlier, about a young couple with student loan debts who basically were putting off starting a family and buying a house because of the debt levels that they were basically just working to pay for every month in terms of you know, their burdens there. And, you know, we need to be, frankly, dealing with the issue of the rate increase, obviously, in the next 67 days. But secondly, we need to have a much bigger national conversation to talk about measures like your bill to create, again, a system that rewards people who are current with their payments, who are making progress in their lives, but that are not going to have a ball and chain around their neck in terms of debt levels that, again, as you point out, at the end of the day, really inhibits creativity and investment and innovation, you know, for people at a time in life when they really should be just spreading their wings, not dragging, you know, these huge burdens of debt that really hold them back and hold our country back. So, again, I really appreciate your contributions here this evening. And, again, the clock is ticking. You know, 67 days and counting. You know, Mr. Romney yesterday basically put up, you know, a strong signal to the congressional majority in the House here, the Republican congressional majority, that, you know, this is something that we must do, and we're still waiting. You know, 146 co-sponsors on H.R. 3826. Again, I'm not somebody who has a big ego. I can, you know, if somebody's got a counter proposal to come up with a different way to do this, you know, we're all ears. But what we don't need is the comments of the chairwoman of the Higher Education Subcommittee basically saying she has no tolerance for students with $80,000 of student loan debt. That is a Congress which is out of touch with the reality that young people are confronting these days, who, again, are just really trying to improve themselves and fill the workforce needs of this country. We cannot afford that type of leadership here in this Congress. We need to have people who are focused on the real condition of the middle class in this country, but also really focused, like Abraham Lincoln was back in 1862, about what's important in terms of the future of this country. So, again, and if you have other comments that you want to share, you know, again, I'd be happy to yield back to you.
Thank you. I would like to respond to your comments. Thank you, Representative. You know, your request for us to keep interest rates at 3.4% is so reasonable that we need to act on that right now. And the point that you mentioned, that we need to have these loans available for our students so they can get the training that they need to be hired into jobs that are going unfilled right now. In metropolitan Detroit, which is known for having a high unemployment rate, where people really want to go to work, that there are thousands of jobs that are available in Metro Detroit that are not being filled because employers can't find the folks that have the training in the information technology area for software engineering. So we want to encourage people to go to school. Even if they don't have the money, we want them to be able to borrow loans without having to go into this type of debt. And my final point is this, too, is that if we allow borrowers to be burdened by student loan debt to such a degree that they can't pay off their debt, we as taxpayers are on the hook for this debt. Probably $500 billion of it, it's taxpayer-backed. So we're on the hook for this one way or the other. We should give our borrowers a helping hand so they can manage their student loan repayments, pay this debt down, and then get on with their lives and help us create jobs throughout this country, throughout this world by selling the best products that Metro Detroit knows how to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. In closing, I just want to again end where we began, which is that it's 67 days and counting. Today, all across America, there are high school seniors who are experiencing probably one of the most exciting moments in their lives, which is that they're going to the mailbox to find out whether or not they've been accepted to a 2-year school or a 4-year school. I remember those days. I have a son who just finished up college and remember how exciting that was, and a daughter who's in high school and hopefully going to hear soon when her turn comes. But the fact of the matter is they need to have some horizon, some predictability at this critical moment to make sure that they can plan and budget to pay for college. Financial aid offices all across the country are putting up warning flags for students and their families that interest rates are going to double unless Congress acts. And the fact of the matter is that creates an instability about planning for what college to go to, what kind of budget a family can really accommodate in terms of paying for student loan debt. And that's wrong. I mean, we can do better than that as a Congress. We can do better than that as a nation. Again, we're glad to see that Mr. Romney finally came around, even though he had sent out signals in opposition to this type of approach by supporting the Ryan budget, which locks in the 6.8% interest rate. But you know what? This issue is too important to get sort of sucked into sort of partisanship here. It is time to move forward, just like we did in 2007 when 77 Republicans voted in favor of the College Cost Reduction Act. 35 Republican senators supported it. President George Bush signed it into law, a program named after Republican Senator Robert Stafford from Vermont. I mean, come on. You know, people are sick and tired of the fact that every single issue, whether it's a highway bill, a payroll tax cut extension, or education assistance for middle-class families, gets sucked into this, just partisan, maelstrom in Washington, D.C. And the fact of the matter is there's 146 members on our side that have co-sponsored H.R. 3826 that are looking for a signal from the Republican majority to say, you know what, it's time to look at our history, it's time to look at the genealogy of the Stafford Student Loan Program and the great bipartisan support to cut those rates 5 years ago. Let's come up with a solution. Let's move. Let's help those families whose students are being accepted into college and those financial aid offices that are trying to help families budget and plan for the next academic school year. 67 days is really not enough time even today, but we should at least not compound it by delay and hopefully not compound it by letting just a totally unacceptable increase in interest rates for Stafford student loan to go into effect. And I look forward to working with you again in the next hours and minutes and days to make sure that that doesn't happen. So thank you for joining me here, Congressman Clark, and I yield back.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud to be on the floor tonight speaking on behalf of the Western Caucus. We in the West have been working for 2 years now, for a year and a half, to help the Obama administration out with their tasks. In September of last year, September 11, President Obama said that he would keep trying every new idea that works and listen to every good proposal, no matter which party it comes no matter which party comes up with it. And so 4 days later, on the 12th of September last year, we in the Western Caucus, Senator Barrasso and myself, sent a letter to President Obama outlining the Jobs Frontier Report, but to date we have not yet heard from the administration. In that jobs report, we have basically 40 different pieces of legislation that create American jobs, utilize American energy, and also stop regulations that are in the process of killing, during this year, 3 million more jobs. So at a time when the nation is faced with 8.2% unemployment, continuing over 8% month after month for one of the longest periods of time in our history, the administration seems pretty flat-footed on ideas, and so we in the Western Caucus felt like that we could assist in that. That's our business. Many of us are familiar with the industries. We're familiar with the job creation that can go on in the Western states. And so we felt like that we were offering help to the administration, but to this point, they've been completely unresponsive. If you go on our website, you would be able to see the Jobs Frontier Report. We've got the cover of it depicted here, and it simply describes in that report the 40 exact pieces of legislation that have already been written and submitted in order to create these jobs. Now, it would be important to understand that all of these jobs, not one of them requires federal input. No federal expenditure, no federal stimulus, no tax to the American people. And instead, we're simply trying to solve the problem with the free market that has caused this country to be so great in the past. We are faced with unemployment in the West that is actually much higher. It's 10.1% in the West, which tells us that the accusations that there is a war on the West, the war on jobs in the West by the administration are verifiable in the unemployment figures. We have other documentation. Gas prices have doubled since 2009. The public lands are facing increasing restrictions. The President has recently stated that the oil production is up in the U.S. Well, he stated a correct thing. But what he should have been, from his perspective, talking about is oil produced on public lands. And when we analyze that, we find out in 2011 that oil based in public lands, produced on public lands, actually decreased by 14%, and that the gas production, natural gas production, decreased by 11%. And so when Secretary Salazar levies his charge that the facts don't speak for what our position is, maybe we could redirect the Secretary to go to the web pages for the government that would describe exactly what we're showing here, that the oil production that is occurring to increase our total production is occurring on private lands. It is not occurring and is in fact decreasing on public lands. That's because the government is slowing down the permitting process. They're finding new and restrictive ways to implement requirements on people who would be creating jobs, who would be drilling for oil. And each of these processes simply strings out our investment. We had testimony earlier today. The House and Senate Western Caucus came together, had testimony from two different panels, and one of the panelists explained that they had paid for these leases on public land, but they in fact then turned them back because the requirements turned it into a proposition that they had not bid on at all. So we continue to find these case examples of too much interference, too much regulation, causing the energy sector to slow down in certain areas on public lands, therefore creating more unemployment and creating a bigger gap. I'll finish one thought, and then I'm going to yield time to my friend Congresswoman Lummis from Wyoming, who is a member of the Western Caucus and is the vice chairman of that. We were in the hearing together earlier today, but at this time in our nation's history, almost everyone agrees that the greatest threat that we face is the continuing debt and the year-after-year deficits. Now, we could try to, there are only three ways that you can solve deficit. If you're spending more money than you're bringing in, as a family, well, you've got a couple of choices. Number one, you can go out and get a second job or retraining to where you make more income, so you can increase your income. Number two, you can cut your expenses down. Or number three, you can borrow money to make up the differences. The federal government is faced with the same conclusions. It either needs to increase revenue, that's by raising taxes, or you can increase revenue by growing the economy, that's creating more jobs. Secondly, you can cut spending. Thirdly, you can borrow. Unfortunately, the federal government goes one extra step that most families, some families actually resort to, but it's against the law for families. It's perfectly legal for the government. But the fourth thing is to print money. And it's that printing of money, that debt which is not being able to be repaid, that is the great threat to the country. If we were to look across the West and see where we've choked off jobs and put those people back to work in the hundreds of thousands of jobs, then each job would do two things. First, they would cut the cost of the government because those people come off of unemployment, welfare, food stamps. But then secondly, they go to work and start paying taxes. So you have a squeeze from both the cost end because the government is spending less money, but you also have an increase in revenue. So your cost and revenue move together when we create jobs. That's the reason that the Western Caucus is concentrated on jobs rather than a taxation policy or a borrowing policy, and especially not on the printing of money policy. So at this moment, I will yield time to my good friend Cynthia Lummis from Wyoming, and we welcome you tonight and thank you for being willing to speak on behalf of the Western Caucus.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your work as chairman of the Western Caucus. The Western states are roughly the 17 Western states and 3 island governments, but they also include members from states who have very similar problems, but who happen to be east of the Mississippi, such as some of the southern states along the Gulf of Mexico that have enormous energy reserves and face some of the same regulatory burdens, and also people from coal-producing states that are east of the Mississippi, such as West Virginia, where a heavy attack on coal has jeopardized jobs and the future of coal in this country as a contributor to our energy future. As we see from the chart next to me and from what Congressman Pierce has previously told us, even though energy production is up, oil and gas production is up on private land, this is the bar to my far right, over closer to me to the left, it shows that energy production, oil and gas production from federal lands has declined, 11% in the case of oil and 6% in the case of natural gas. Now, why is this affecting gas prices? Why does President Obama say that drilling more now on federal land will not affect oil prices now or the price of gas at the pump? Well, there's two ways to look at that. One is he's correct that it's not going to affect the price of gasoline today or tomorrow. But the fact that we're not drilling now and that permits are not being issued now, we know of about 22 projects for the proposed 44,000 new oil and gas wells on private land that are being held up, that's going to be gas production and oil production that will be available in the future, anywhere from 3 to 7 years, that because of these regulatory burdens is not going to be produced. And that not only drives up the price of gasoline and power of all kinds, energy of all kinds, in those future years, long after President Obama is out of office, but it does affect today's futures market, because the people who are looking at the price of gasoline are looking at whether production is continuing to go up in this country. And that is a factor that is considered when futures pricing occurs. And because it's very obvious that the government policy in the United States for the last 4 years has been away from oil, gas, and coal, and in favor only of solar and wind energy because we subsidize it so heavily and promote it so heavily at the United States Department of Energy. It does affect the price of oil, gasoline, and eventually gasoline at the pump. Now, another factor related to the coal issue that I mentioned is, but are we going to hurt our environment if we don't quit using coal? And the answer is to look at our regulatory work that was done prior to President Obama taking office, and it's represented on this chart. Let's look from 1970. The population of the United States is up 48% since then. Coal-fueled electricity up 184% since then. The gross domestic product of the United States up 200% since the 1970s, in part because we've had affordable, reliable, and abundant electricity. And so much of what we've done in this country in producing job growth is based on the fact that we have been able to rely on affordable, abundant electricity, and half of that has come from coal. Now, in that same time period, emissions from power plants had declined 60%. Look at all this growth. Look at even the growth in coal-fueled electricity and the decline in emissions, down 60%. And that's due to the Clean Air Act and compliance with the Clean Air Act. The point here being regulations can be valuable when done properly. And the Clean Air Act was a regulation that had the desired impact. It dropped emissions 60% by 2008. The problem has been since 2008, the efforts to over-regulate have stifled our ability to create more energy from coal. It has reduced the number of jobs from coal. It has reduced revenue from coal, and it has reduced the affordability of electricity going into the future. Mr. Chairman, I have some other points that I want to make about this, but for now I'd like to just point out that the people who are bearing the brunt of our policies on energy in this country for the last 4 years have been people of very modest income, because when gasoline prices go up at the pump, when your electric bill goes up, it is the people who are in the lower middle class population or in a category of workers who make very little money and struggle to make ends meet, especially single mothers, who are really bearing the brunt of these policies. And these policies are choices of this administration. They are conscious decisions that they are willing to see prices go up for coal, oil, gas-generated power in order to make them more competitive with higher cost, higher priced wind and solar energy. These are bad policies for the average everyday American. These are bad policies for America's working mothers. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Wyoming for her presentation and the facts that she presents. One of the things that people constantly say who are opposed to oil and gas, to energy coming from America, is that it's impossible to drill and remain environmentally sensitive and safe. I think that those people are simply not looking at current technology. It is possible with today's technology to drill up to 7 miles horizontally. That would be like drilling from here in this room here across the Potomac River somewhere out into Crystal City and putting a drill bit through a window that's maybe this large. So what we're able to do is drill down 3,000 or 4,000 feet, maybe 5,000 feet, turn horizontally, and drill and hit the zones of production. It is possible in today's technology to preserve almost the entire footprint of whether we're wanting grasslands or forest lands or whatever. We almost don't have to disturb those because the drill bit actually will be so far beneath the surface. We don't have to go in and clear locations like we did 15, 20, and 30 years ago. You can also take one well, drill it straight down, and then come off of that and put multiple well bores so that what used to be spread on quarter acre or quarter mile spacing or half mile spacing might now today be one well for any number of the distributed wells. And so the environmental impacts of drilling today are probably less than in any other technology. Wind energy, for instance, wind is very large in New Mexico. They've got these miles and miles of wind generators standing in the air, very large footprint. New Mexico is very capable of producing a lot of wind, but one of the problems is that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So those technologies are producing, we had in Arizona recently, one of the operators of a wind farm said that they get about 12.5% reliability. That is about 12.5% of the time they're getting generated power out of the wind. And it's somewhat higher in Arizona for solar, about 25% of the time. And so when people are talking about converting from oil and gas to wind and solar, and I think every one of us believe that we ought to be using all those forms of energy, but we have to understand that if we go to 12.5% reliability, that's the amount of time that when you flip the switch that you're going to have power. And I think most of us are living lives that we demand and need power immediately for use of the home appliances, for use of our computers. Manufacturing, you don't want power that's just available part-time. Generally, manufacturing is expensive, competitive. We're trying to keep our manufacturing jobs here. And the last thing we want to do is tell manufacturers, you've got to shut down for 10 hours a day because the wind's not blowing. And so the modern economies absolutely demand the predictability of good power when you flip the switch to turn on equipment or to turn on things in your home. So it is possible to provide those energy resources at the same time that we protect the environment. Much less destruction. My father's generation, there were lots of problems. But my generation, I watched as major companies began to clean up things that had originated back in the 20s and the 30s. And so it's necessary for us to say that every single one of us wants to see the environment clean. They want clean water. They want the soil to be clean, clean air. And it is possible to achieve both because of the technologies that we have today. So I would draw our attention next to the fact that this administration has been saying that they want an all-of-the-above energy policy. At the same time, then they're increasing restrictions on public lands and access to public lands. They're making it more difficult for the producers, both coal, electricity generation. They're making it so much more difficult that everyone in the West is struggling under the load. The reason that the West has to deal with the problem more than the East is that the Western lands are so much more owned by the government. State government and federal government own such a large proportion of the land in the East or in the West that it's incomprehensible to states back east exactly about the problems that we face. But whether it's endangered species, whether it is restrictions, whether it is EPA, all of the agencies play a part in slowing down the process. So recently, our administration, through Mr. Abbey at the BLM, said that we really want the BLM across the nation to lower the time required to give permits. And in fact, that time is still abysmally high at over 200 days. I see my friend, Mr. Bishop from Utah, standing ready to speak, and at this time, if he is ready, we'll yield time to Mr. Bishop, and we appreciate your presence on the Western Caucus. Mr. Bishop is the past chairman and still the respected person on the House Western Caucus. Thank you for being here tonight, and we appreciate your participation on the caucus.
I appreciate the gentleman from New Mexico's introduction, which is far more fluent than my presentation will be. But I share what the gentleman from New Mexico, as well as the gentlelady from Wyoming, have said on this particular issue, that we in the West seem to have a unique situation in which there is an effort to try and stifle, hopefully by simply incompetence, and not out of planning, but stifle the economic growth that we need so desperately in the West for our kids and for our future. There are two things that were said today, I read in the paper, that comes from this administration, which tells us that we are obviously in a campaign season and that the words simply are being used in a unique and different way. The President once said that the party of which I belong is currently engaged in a war on the poor, which I find unique because, to be honest, when you have overriding and ever-increasing energy costs, that, as the gentlelady from Wyoming said, that is the real war on the poor. Somebody who is in the bottom portion of our economic sphere, our economic status, will pay 3 times as high a percentage of their income for increased energy prices as those who are in the top will. So if you have a nice urban job, you may have an inconvenience as energy prices go up, but if you're one of those struggling working families trying to make ends meet, this becomes a unique situation. When gas prices go up to $4 or more, climbing towards $5, they may dip down again, but they will certainly rise one more time. It hurts the poor far worse than it does any other sector of our country. They are the ones who have the least likely chance of actually having some kind of fuel-efficient automobile. And yet they probably have the greatest chance of needing desperately that car simply to go to work and have no other options whatsoever. They are the ones who will have the most difficult time trying to heat their homes in the middle of winter with increased costs of fuel going up. They are the ones who will recognize, first of all, that whenever the cost of gasoline goes up, the cost of food will also go up, simply because it takes money to send that food to market so that you can buy it. And all of that hits those who are in the lowest sector of our economy harder than those who are in the upper sector of our economy. Like, it's one of the estimates we used a couple of years ago that said for every $420 a family has to pay in increased energy costs, it'll equate to 6,000 jobs that will be lost in the economy. Now, that's one of the problems that we simply find ourselves in. And the sad part about that is we don't have to do it. This is not an energy-poor country. In fact, it is an energy-rich country. We should be using the resources that we have here in the country to enrich ourselves and to help each other to have a better lifestyle, not going worse. And the competition for energy is going to increase as time goes on. There are 6.5 billion people in the world. 2 billion of those 6.5 have no electricity today. They're going to want that in the future, which means our energy needs will be increasing, not diminishing. Doesn't matter what kind of effort you put in there, our energy needs worldwide will be increasing. We have to be able to plan for that. I had a good friend who is one of the CEOs of an energy company today that said when he was in college back in 1973, the word went out there that we were in an energy crisis. We were running out of oil. We had to come up with a way of solving that problem. This is still the Shah's era. So we did. In 1977, we came up with a national energy plan. It was a colossal failure. It was an effort to do centralized planning here in Washington to come up with a way of solving our problem in the future, and it failed miserably. And now, 30 years later, we have people in the bureaucracies of this administration who want to try and reinvent a very bad wheel that didn't work back in the 1970s. You know, someone has to tell this administration and this city that back in 1988, the Berlin Wall fell down, and the idea of centralized plans was discredited throughout the entire world, not only in government but also in industry. Everyone learned that lesson except the bureaucracies here in Washington, where the solution of this administration And far too much that takes place in this city is still the same idea of let's get a big government plan and let the government control everything. We want energy security, but we don't want to drill anywhere. We don't like $4 a gallon of gasoline prices, but we're not ready to increase any refineries anywhere. We don't necessarily want more coal or hydro or nuclear, but we're not ready to come up with any kind of alternative. We don't necessarily want to, actually do want to have more gas coming in here, but we're not ready to put any pipelines in place to try and make sure that that actually happens. And the end result is we lose. The Western Energy Alliance made the prediction that because of our lack of energy development on public lands in the West, we have lost 16,000 jobs and almost $4 billion of infrastructure investment that comes in there. Secretary of Interior made a speech today where he called a lot of things we talk about here in Congress the imagined energy world. I think this administration believes in that imagined energy world. It's very easy for this administration to list all their alternative energy projects by name because they have very few of them. They're not moving ahead with solar power. They're not moving ahead with wind power. They're not moving ahead with anything else, and they're not moving ahead with alternative forms either. And this hits us in the West specifically. Now, Mr. Pierce, I don't want to consume too much time. You may want to go another direction, but I'm an old school teacher. So this is one of the areas that has concern to me. This map is obviously the United States. Everything in red is what is controlled by the federal government. You notice that we in the West have the unique opportunity of having 1/2 of everything in the West controlled by the federal government. Federal government controls 1 out of every 3 acres in the nation. And in some of our states, it's like 90%, 70%, 60% of all the land is still controlled by the nation. Now, one of the things that you may say is, well, is that bad? I want to contend to some of my good friends who live in the other parts of the nation that they have an interest in all this red stuff over there because they are shelling out. My good friends who live in the East are shelling out $8 to $9 billion a year in order to control the West, to pay for all this land. Every year in their efforts to make sure that this map stays the same, that's $8 to $9 billion that comes out of their pockets. And what do they get for that investment? They get this map. The states that are in red are the states that have the hardest time funding their education systems over the last several decades. Now, notice once again, the states in red, the area in red is the federal government-owned land. The states in red are the ones that have a hard time funding. You notice there is kind of a correlation simply between the two. This is what the United States is getting for its $9 billion investment to control the West. We are harming our schools. Now, even in this land that's in the West, we have a huge backlog in maintenance issues. Our National Park Service are hundreds of millions of dollars behind in their maintenance system. There are some states like mine who simply said, you know, this is ridiculous. Our kids are being harmed in their education funding. We can't generate the money we need for our own infrastructure. Why don't you just let us take control of the land, and we will save those pristine areas that need to be saved. We will ensure there is access for recreation and multiple use, and we will develop those resources. The Secretary of Interior today said simply, that concept defies common sense. The idea that only the federal government has the ability and the intelligence to control this kind of land, and that people who live in the states obviously can't do it, defies common sense. So what this means is a federal government that wants to spend more money for land acquisition, that cannot maintain its own land right now, that harms kids in the West with their education funding, that underfunds all the projects that are there right now and simply wants more and more. That's the common sense. If that indeed is the future, then we have a long, long way to go. We in the West simply have a simple situation. We can do it just as well, if not better, and my argument to you is we can actually do it better. That's what should be common sense. Our kids are being harmed by this system. We are not producing jobs for our kids because of this system. And what I think we need to do in the West is realize this is a country that has energy potential, energy ability, job potential, job ability, and we have kids that definitely need. We in the West, we pay more taxes than they do in the East when you add everything up. We put a higher percentage of our state budgets into education than they do in the East. We actually have higher class sizes than those in the East. We have more kids than those in the East. We need to have the ability of actually meeting our particular needs. And part of that is for this administration to simply realize you've got to help develop the resources that we have. We can control it, we can fund it, we can do it if you give us the opportunity just to move forward. This administration says that we are producing more oil now than ever before because it's all being produced on private property where they can't control it, try as they might to. If they simply unleash the potential in all this red area, this country would move forward in a growth spurt that is almost impossible to imagine. That's the common sense plan. Very happy to be a part of this issue because I'm excited about what my colleagues are saying in a much more refined way than I've been able to do that. And I'm excited about hearing some more of my Westerners who realize, hey, listen, there is a war on Western jobs and it needs to stop. We need to have help in creating Western jobs, not hindrance in stopping Western jobs. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments and would again accentuate both his points and the gentlelady from Wyoming about the administration's current war on the poor. Because every time, and we've heard repeated comments from the administration and their representatives that we need to get the price of gasoline up so that people will consume less. That, yes, the price of electricity by our policies will necessarily increase dramatically. The price of electricity increasing, the price of gas increasing, punish the poor terribly. Why would we have policies that are so unfair to the poor? It defies imagination. Also, following up with my friend's comments about the Secretary saying that it is impossible, just not feasible, even unimaginable that that people in the states would take better care of the property than the federal government has, I would simply direct the Secretary's attention to those massive forest fires in the West. They are managing our forests in order that they would burn down. They in the federal government have choked the bureaucracy full of people in order to manage these resources, but instead they manage them in a process that ultimately sees that they will burn down. It's not a question of if, but when. The final comment I'm going to make, and then I'm going to yield time to my friend from Colorado, but the President recently asked for $52 million to crack down on speculators, which he claims are the cause of high gas prices. $52 million to crack down on speculators. Now, speculators, you have to understand that they make their money by guessing which way the market is going to go. Right now, they see a government that is choking down access to supplies, so they scratch their head and say, we think maybe the price is going to go up, and so they speculate and buy on the assumption that the price of gas is going up, the price of oil is going up, and lo and behold, they're making money. But if the President were to announce today that he were going to open, and people sincerely believed him, that he were going to open access to federal lands, those same speculators who today think the price is going to go up would begin to say, oh, I better buy down because if I bid up and the price falls, I'm going to lose money. So those speculators would begin to drive the price down. Well, he doesn't need $52 million. All he needs to do is give one sentence from the White House that the war on the West is ending and we're going to open the West oil production up again. That would do the trick. No $52 million putting us deeper into debt. Simply makes sense to us from the West because we see it day in and day out. We're joined tonight by our good friend Doug Lamborn from Colorado, and welcome here. It's nice to see you and appreciate your participation in the Western Caucus. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Well, thank you, Representative. You do such a great job representing New Mexico, and you know so much about energy issues and other, like financial institutions, issues like that as well. But this is a great forum. Thank you for organizing this and your leadership on energy issues. And I want to quickly address an issue that is of great concern to many people, myself included, and that is who should be regulating things like hydrologic fracturing, or fracking for short. here in the United States. We have about 10 different federal agencies that have their hand involved one way or another in regulating fracking, or at least trying to do so. From the EPA all the way to the Securities and Exchange Commission, if you can believe that. And I'm concerned because in my work on the Natural Resources Committee, along with Rob Bishop that you heard from earlier, we have been hearing that the Bureau of Land Management, one of the agencies that our committee oversees, is proposing rules regulating fracking on public lands. And the concern about that is that right now, in a state like Colorado, my own state, those state regulators are already doing a great job regulating fracking. They know the local geology, they know the water, the water aquifers, they know the things that someone in Washington is not really going to know. And if you add a second layer of bureaucracy onto what the states are already doing, you have the potential, in fact the certainty, of crippling job production, crippling energy production, because you'll have twice as many regulations to have to deal with if you're an energy producer. So why in the world do we need to take, when the states are already doing a good job, adding another layer of red tape and bureaucracy? I'm really concerned about that. The subcommittee that I'm the chairman of on natural resources, energy and mineral resources, is having a hearing in Denver next week on Wednesday the 2nd of May, at the state capitol in Denver, and we're going to get right into this very issue. Should the states be regulating fracking, or do we also want to have the federal government regulating as well? And I hope that the evidence shows, and I believe it will, that the states are already doing a great job. We can only lose by having another layer of regulation. So, Congressman Pierce, this is an issue that affects energy in the West on public lands, and I'm really concerned that we have federal agencies getting involved when the states are already doing a fine job, and it's only going to hurt the production of energy and the creation of jobs.
That is often omitted by the opponents of fracking is that the people who most want fracking not to communicate with the freshwater or the oil companies themselves, they drill this $1 million well bore, then they run casing in the well bore, they put cement outside that casing in order that they can have a nice tight well bore in order to produce the oil. It allows them to pump the oil out expeditiously. And when they frack thousands of feet below the water zones. They're usually up right at the surface. And for contamination to occur, that pressure that is pumped down in the thousands of feet lower in the well would have to come outside the well bore, outside the cement around the casing, all the way to the surface, and then contaminate the water up there. In doing that, they've ruined the entire well bore. So the companies themselves are watching to see if there's any drop in pressure. That's when you know that you've got something bleeding off. They shut everything down. They patiently look at it. The oil companies, again, are the best custodians of the water because they don't want to ruin the well that they've spent months drilling and a lot of money in completing. I noticed that my good friend Ms. Lummis is back at the podium and would yield more time to her at this point.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to point out, in relation to our federal budget, what states are experiencing. So let's start with the federal budget. Here we have all our revenue for 2011 in this column. Here we have just our entitlement programs that we spend money on in this column. So we're spending all of the tax revenue we take in this country just on our entitlement programs. That is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, other mandatory programs such as food stamps and school lunches, and then, of course, interest on the debt, which means every other discretionary program and the global war on terror and our national defense is all borrowed money, borrowed from China, from Saudi Arabia, from Japan, and from American companies and the American people. That would never happen in a state. On the front page of my state's statewide newspaper today was an article that our governor, the Wyoming Governor Matt Mead, is asking all state agencies to budget for an 8% cut in spending, and the health department a 4% cut in spending. And this is because natural gas prices in the United States have dropped below $2 an MCF, which is extremely low, and my state is the second largest producer of natural gas in the nation, and we're heavily reliant on natural gas for revenues. So what do we do when our revenues decline? We cut spending. We budget differently. We don't hire people to replace to sit in vacant positions. We leave those positions vacant, or better yet, make them completely go away. That's what states do to manage their problems. But an interesting source of revenue for the state is income off state lands, and it's a very important source of revenue. Now, Mr. Bishop from Utah pointed out earlier this evening that the American taxpayers are paying $8 billion, Mr. Bishop, to pay for administering public lands in the West. In my state of Wyoming, we could be managing those lands, and if you went and looked at the quality of our state lands, you would be thoroughly impressed. They are beautifully managed. The stewardship is well done. We are producing oil and gas. We're producing livestock, cattle and sheep. We're producing timber. We're producing recreational opportunities, open space. We're creating, because of all that open space, places where clean air, clean water, and clean living can really work together. It is a wonderful system with much smaller administrative costs than the American people are paying for the federal lands in the West. We've proven as states who received land when we became states that we can manage all of the land in our state that's not private land. Consequently, I agree with what Mr. Bishop said earlier. The fact that we have NEPA, FLPMA, SMACRA, CERCLA, and lots of other laws that are managed from the federal government's level that could be managed at the state level would make it much less expensive, would make the land stewardship closer to home, where the people who really love and thrive on these important lands live and work and want to recreate and want to participate in the management of these lands. They'd also produce more revenue for the states, making states like Utah, like my own state of Wyoming, where we prioritize education, public education, above all other expenditures of government, we would make more money available. Because, as you know, in most states, the property taxes go largely to the education system. Well, when the land belongs to the federal government doesn't pay taxes. Consequently, that money's not available to us. Now, states do get something called PILT payments, payments in lieu of taxes, but they're not the same as if that land were on the tax rolls of the states in which those lands reside. Consequently, look at what we've summed up. We're producing less jobs off federal lands with more regulations, more cost to the American taxpayer, less revenue to the states, less revenue to the federal government, and lost potential for job creation. The job seekers end up being on unemployment instead of paying taxes because of the salaries that are paid. And when you have great paying jobs, like in the oil and gas industry, where the average job pays $72,000 a year, a much higher wage than the average wage in our states, we really are hurting ourselves terribly by not prioritizing jobs, not using federal lands to their fullest capabilities in a way that provides great stewardship that those of us in the West value and seek and yearn for and want and would never compromise in order to have a robust state and a robust economy. I want to thank Mr. Pierce once again for his leadership, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady. And before I yield time to my good friend Mr. Bishop again, I'm reading in today's quotes that Interior Secretary Salazar said that House Republicans live in an imagined energy world. But now, I appreciate his concern and his criticism. I consider it as constructive. But think about this imagination. The President in March of 2012 said we can't just drill our way to lower gas prices. We can't drill our way to lower gas prices. That's a viewpoint that could be considered legitimate, except that about the same time he's calling for Brazil and Saudi Arabia to increase their drilling in order to get the prices down so that people in America don't have to pay as much at the pump. Now, I'm not sure what imagined energy world says that it'll cause the price of gas to go down if they drill in Saudi Arabia and Brazil, but it won't cause the price of gas to go down if we drill over here. That, to me, argues that that is instead an imagined energy world. The Secretary goes on to talk about that these members of the Republican Party are members of the Flat Earth Society in a demeaning term. Now, my county, you can see from one end to the other, miles and miles, and if you turn and look east, you can see all the way to Dallas, 300 or 400 miles away. I do live in a flat part of New Mexico and can see across the line into Texas. And so he speaks in demeaning terms about flat Earth, and yet he's very happy to have all the production of oil and gas that comes from there. So the flat broke administration is criticizing the Flat Earth Society, and of the two, I would rather live on flat ground than be flat broke. And so I would yield a couple of minutes to my good friend, and then I'll close out. And Mr. Bishop, thank you.
Thank the gentleman from New Mexico, and once again, I do agree with you. I enjoy your image of the world much better than what this particular administration. Can I remind you back? You remember Back to the Future when they had the two movies? What happened if Biff got the sport sheets, and what happened if he didn't? It's almost what we're doing here. There are two actual visions of what the future of this America will be. And I'm sorry, this administration keeps taking us down the road in which Biff actually does have the sport sheets and is able to win all those bets and get control of everything. I just want to add one other thing to what the gentlelady from Wyoming also said here. When we talk about the federal government and what the federal government does on private lands, I just want to realize it is not only related to the what they do on public lands is not just related to public lands itself. We find that this administration is not satisfied with just living within the boundaries of public lands, but is coming up with policies that impact private property that is next to those public lands. When this administration took over in the state of Utah, there were 77 oil leases that had gone through a 7-year review. They had all the public hearings. They did everything. They were ready to be let for sale to try and develop those resources in the eastern part of my state. The very first thing this administration did was recall those 77 leases. It didn't matter that the process had gone through. They had done the work. They recalled them for the purpose of special interest groups for their satisfaction. What happened in the eastern part of my state is the unemployment rate simply skyrocketed. Not only for these 77 leases that were on public land, but the private sector that was there ready to invest saw the handwriting on the wall and they pulled out of that particular area. They were not ready to go through the kind of harassment as well as the regulation that they could see taking place, and the unemployment skyrocketed. The investment in that area went. Only now is it starting gradually and gradually to come back in. Here's the problem that we have with this administration's policies. Not only do they inhibit energy production and jobs that can be generated on public lands, their efforts of increased regulation and efforts to inhibit that kind of development takes away jobs on private property, where they see that there is not a future there. They don't want to go through the regulatory hassle. And so what could have been developed in my state basically went to North Dakota on private lands, and there they found their ability to make lots of money and to increase the energy production here because they simply did not have to deal with this administration. And unfortunately, it's not just about energy jobs. This administration on public lands is doing the same thing for recreation jobs. With the number of roads that have been closed on both forest and BLM lands, stopping the ability of people to hunt and fish and do other forms of regulation. Even the kinds of regulation on outfitters that tells them what kind of coffee they have to serve when they're in Park Service property, that is an impediment to the development of our recreation community and recreation jobs at the same time. I'm sorry, one of these things we have to realize is that this administration's effort to try and control everything is producing nothing that is helping us create jobs for our kids to keep them at home. And I appreciate Mr. Pierce for actually starting this process and talking about this issue because it needs desperately to be addressed. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. The Senate, Senator Hatch is going to introduce this week the WEST Act, which is a combined 10 bills that